Alright guys, welcome back to the channel. It's Maddie here and happy Pokemon Day. Today we had the Pokemon Big Direct announcement thing where they announced a whole bunch of stuff about Pokemon in general, but of course we did get our announcement that we were expecting to come today for the new mini set coming A2A, aka now we know that it is called Triumphant Light, a mini set based around Arceus EX. So in yesterday's video we had some leaked information that some people did they were skeptical about. I'm not gonna lie, there were plenty of comments telling me that, you know, some of the stuff we were talking about was fake. I was pretty confident that it wasn't. Just for reference, I'm not going to really mention or talk about things on my channel if they're not probably real or very likely to be real. So it's okay to be skeptical. I really do agree, but a lot of the stuff we talked about yesterday ended up being very, very accurate, at least to a degree that I think, I guess we'll go into today. But yes, Triumphant Light has been announced officially, and we have a lot of new cards here. So today what we're going to do is we're going to talk about what all of these new cards are going to be doing and how they're going to be affecting the metagame that comes up here in the new mini set. If you think back to a little while ago, back when Mythical Island came out, the first mini set that expanded on Genetic Apex, there was a massive shift in the metagame at that time. Really, in Genetic Apex, it was completely dominated by things like Mewtwo, Pikachu, and a little bit of Charizard. I should say, when Mythical Island came out, it really turned the entire metagame on its heel with things like Celebi, Mewiax, Gyarados, and just massive changes. I don't know if we're going to see as much of a crazy meta shift with Triumphant Light coming with, and adding to Spacetime Smackdown as we did with Mythical Island and Genetic Apex. We'll have to see. But let's get into some of these new cards here. And yes, this Arceus EX that we talked about yesterday is real. So if if you're kind of staying tuned and if you watched yesterday's video, this should at least, be no surprise to you. You've probably seen the announcements already, but yes, Arceus EX is coming. I know some people were a little bit, they expected that this card couldn't be real because I guess maybe they thought it wasn't strong enough, but I actually do think this is a really strong card. So 140 HP, it's a colorless basic Pokemon, Fabled Luster, its ability, so it's not affected by any special conditions. This is like status conditions, things like poison, like burn, like sleep, paralysis, so it's immune to all of that. Not a super impactful ability, but it is at least nice to have. We don't know, all of the other cards, I suppose, that are going to be coming in this set. It hasn't been fully leaked or fully announced yet, so we're going to have to wait until tomorrow. But special conditions typically aren't anything super relevant in the format. Poison has been somewhat relevant, but it's not, a big sort of important aspect of the metagame, I should say. So that's the Fabled Luster ability here, but then we also have Ultimate Force, 70 damage, does 20 more for each energy, or not each energy, sorry, I made that mistake yesterday. 20 damage for each of your benched Pokemon, so 60 plus 70 is 130. Pretty significant here. Again, we did see a lot of other cards, I should say, that came out in this announcement that, again, as we speculated yesterday, are going to be uniquely tied to Arceus EX. We talked about the symbol here that's on Arceus EX, this Arceus kind of base symbol here on the center of the card. And then we saw in the trailer that things like Heatran that were on the bench, as we see here, a better image of it, and also Crobat, have these symbols. We saw that in the trailer yesterday, that leaked video, and that those cards were somehow associated with Arceus EX. I did assume that to be the case, so we were correct there. However, what I did not expect, because initially I thought that those cards that we played on the bench that had the symbol and that were associated with Arceus were actually going to be cards that buffed Arceus as a card, but it's actually the other way around, which I was not expecting, something that's very interesting. So here's Carnivine as an example, but these cards, basically you play them with Arceus EX and they have additional effects that buff the cards themselves as long as Arceus EX is on the field. I think that's very interesting. Now, we could get some more variants like this, or some more cards that buff Arceus instead of getting buffed themselves by Arceus. We'll have to see, although right now we do have one for, I believe, every type in the game. That's Grass, Fire, Water, Electric, Psychic, Fighting, Dark, Steel. We don't have a Dragon one, but we also have Electric. So seemingly every type in the game at least has one Arceus branded card, one blessed card, or whatever you want to call it. So we'll talk about those in a minute, but basically all of these cards that we see here, Arcanine, Tyranitar, Heatran, Rotom, Magnezone, Raichu, Abomasnow, Crobat, they all have additional abilities that basically make those Pokemon better. They buff themselves as long as Arceus EX is in play. That's sort of the mechanic here. It's a little bit of a gimmick for this expansion. I wasn't expecting us to get this much of this kind of gimmicky of a card with Arceus, but it is kind of cool. We'll have to see exactly how it formulates in the metagame, but I did say that Arceus in my last video was going to be a very meta impactful card, and I still really do believe that to be the case. I think that there's going to be a lot of opportunities with Arceus, and I think that in general it's actually a very strong card. But let's go ahead and quickly take a look at all of these Arceus associated cards. So first up we have Carnivine. And Carnivine is really interesting. So Basically, it is similar to Skarmory is what I would compare this card to. Basic grass Pokemon, 80 HP, Vine Whip, 20 damage. However, if we have an Arceus EX in play meaning it's either on our bench or in the active spot, not in our hand, basically. If we have an Arceus EX in play, the attacks used by this Pokemon do 30 more damage to your opponent's active Pokemon. So basically, Vine Whip becomes a 50 damage attack, similar to how Skarmory's attack goes to 50 damage if we have a tool card attached. This is very, very similar. So a grass type Skarmory card, basically 50 damage, turn 1, basic Pokemon for 1 energy. It's going to be really, really strong. Skarmory is one of the most impactful cards in the metagame right now. Very, very good aggro card. Again, it's a little bit different than Skarmory because we're kind of reliant. We have to play this card with Arceus, whereas with Skarmory, we don't have to play Skarmory with really any other Pokemon. We do see play with Magnemite and Magneton and Magnezone line. We also see it play with Bastiodon. So it should be on paper around the same amount of consistency as Skarmory to get this set up. But one thing that you have to keep in mind is that since we're playing this with Arceus, then we also always have a chance to start with Arceus in our deck. And Arceus has a retreat cost of 2, whereas in Skarmory decks, you either always start with Skarmory if you're playing the Bastiodon version, or if you're playing Magnezone, Magnemite only has a retreat cost of 1. So there's a little bit of a lack of consistency as compared to Skarmory for a variety of reasons. However, you can find Arceus off of a Pokeball, which of course for Skarmory you can't do that. You have to draw into the tool cards to get that fully fleshed out, I guess, attack for 50 damage. So I like Carnivine. More aggro cards I think are good for the format. It's interesting that they made the grass one an aggro card because we already have Executor, which is a very fast-paced card in its own right. But nonetheless, very interesting Carnivine card there. And like I said, all of the cards with the symbol are meant to be played or associated with Arceus. I mean, you can play them separately, but their full effect don't go into play, or their abilities rather don't get activated if Arceus isn't in the field. But we'll see. Some of these cards really, it doesn't necessarily matter, or I guess it's not super important to have Arceus rather in play for some of these cards. But next up is Tyranitar, Stage 2, holographic. None of these are EX Pokemon, at least not yet. 160 HP fighting type. We have Land Crush for 4 energies, 130, but if we have an Arceus EX in play, this does 30 more damage. That's 160 for 4 energies on a Stage 2 Pokemon. I mean, 160 HP hitting for 160 is pretty crazy. This is actually better than I think most Stage 2 EX Pokemon, which is kind of funny to me. Something like a Machamp EX literally does 130 for 3 energies, so it's very similar in that vein. We don't have a way to accelerate energies to this Pokemon yet, but technically speaking, 160 is a very good number. It should one-hit KO most Pokemon in the format. Tyranitar could be viable. I'm not like pulling your chain here. I think that this card is actually exceptionally strong. It is weak to grass, so we got to keep that in mind. Celebi, 3 coin flips, we are getting KO'd, but 160 is a very, very strong number, and it can one-hit KO a lot of Pokemon in the format. So very, very strong. One of the strongest attacks in the entire game in terms of just like straight up damage. I'm actually kind of impressed by Tyranitar. Again, I don't know how viable a lot of these cards will be. I think when the full set comes out, we'll get a better idea of maybe what the best strategies are, decks that we can play are. But it's very, very interesting. This whole mechanic here is very interesting in its own right. And next we have Heatran. It's a basic Pokemon, fire type, 110 HP. We have Raging Mad Strike, 40 damage plus 40 more if this Pokemon has any damage on it, or if it has any damage taken, basically. 2 fire energy, so up to 80 damage, and if we have Arceus in play, this Pokemon has a free retreat cost. Very interesting for sure. Retreat cost of 3, so going from 3 to free is pretty significant, I would say, but retreating right now in the format isn't that really impactful anyway, because Cyrus, I think that the format is kind of, the current metagame is really shaped around Cyrus and the fact that people really are leaving Pokemon in the active spot until they get KO'd, because it's not really worth it to do anything other than that. So Heatran's pretty cool. It actually is pretty decent against Executor. For example, like if we get hit with an Executor and we take 40 damage, that's totally fine. We have potions, we have ways to heal this thing back up. And then we're then attacking for 80 damage. For weakness, that's 100 damage. We are 2 at KOing an Executor, even with Erica's, I believe. Or no, maybe not with Erica's, but not with Erica's, but still very, very strong card here. Should be pretty decent against Executor. We'll have to see how good this card really is. Again, 110 HP is a little bit low. A lot of Pokemon are hitting over that threshold, so in a lot of matchups, this card might not be that useful, but still pretty interesting. And next up is Rotom, a Psychic-type Rotom card, which is really, really cool. 70 HP, another basic Pokemon. Speed Link if Arceus EX is in play. I should note, actually, I've been saying Arceus EX, but a lot of these Pokemon here, they reference Arceus or Arceus EX. I should have probably mentioned that earlier. So we haven't got it really shown, or it hasn't been announced yet, but there assumably is an Arceus card that's not Arceus EX, which we should still be able to play to activate the abilities of all of these Pokemon. So keep that in mind. That's very significant. I didn't mention that earlier, but Anyway, Rotom. Speed Link. If you have an Arceus or Arceus EX in play, this Pokemon has no retreat cost, so free retreat on a basic 70 HP Pokemon with the dash attack. Does 20 damage to one of your opponent's bench Pokemon. So this is sort of a toned down, colorless attack version of Hitmonlee that we've seen. Hitmonlee, I think, has 80 HP and does 30 damage to the bench. Now we have 70 HP, we do 20 damage to the bench. The difference here is that we can play this in almost any deck. I actually really like this card. I think that this card could be extremely relevant in a lot of different scenarios. Early bench damage tagging can be super useful. I think next format, or this upcoming format with Arceus, a lot of decks are going to be running more Pokemon. They're going to be having a lot more Pokemon on their bench to fully activate all of the abilities and whatnot, and to fully utilize all of the synergies that are coming in this expansion. So a card like this that's able to do early damage to a bench Pokemon, tag it for Cyrus later in the game, could be very useful. One, colorless energy as well, so it's splashable. You can play it in basically any deck. But that is Rotom, pretty cool as well. We have Magnezone, a Metal-type Magnezone, and yes, we should still be able to play the Electro-type Magneton and then evolve into the Metal-type Magnezone. But it's got the ability here, Resilience Link, so if you have Arceus or Arceus EX in play, this Pokemon takes 30 less damage from attacks. That's kind of cool, 140, so 170 true HP to one-shot this thing. Nothing really is able to do that, to be honest. We are weak to fire. Power Beam, so 2 Steel Energies, 1 Colorless. That's only 80 damage. The other Magnezone for 3 energies does 110. So I don't think that we're probably going to see this card see nearly as much play, I should say, as the Electro-type Magnezone that we got from Space-Time Smackdown, just because the Electro-type one can really power itself up on its own. With Magneton, technically you can use Magneton on this card, before you evolve into this Magnezone, and just at least, cover maybe one of those colorless energies in its attack cost. But overall, I don't really think that this card is that good, in my opinion. It's also a Stage 2 Pokemon. The big reason why Magnezone right now, the Electro-type one, sees a lot of play is because, yeah, it's a Stage 2 Pokemon, but it's very consistent, and you don't have to really do anything other than evolve it. It sets itself up, and it's very much playable in a lot of decks. This Pokemon is not necessarily like that, so I'm not super high on this Magnezone, at least in comparison to the other Magnezone, but fairly interesting nonetheless. And we have another Raichu card. I think this is our 3rd or 4th Raichu card. Raichu, 90 HP, Stage 1, Electro-type Pokemon. Resilience Link, this Pokemon also takes 30 less damage from attacks. If we have Arceus or Arceus EX in play. This is kind of an interesting one. Only 90 HP. The attack is also pretty weak as well. Does for 2 lightning energies, does 40 damage and 20 to one of your opponent's bench. So that's 60 total damage for 2 energies on a Stage 1 Pokemon. And technically, yes, we have more HP. I don't know. This card just doesn't really seem that good to me. But again, we'll have to see. A lot of the stuff is important in context. A lot of these cards, we'll have to see exactly how useful they are once we get the full set list and we kind of are able to visualize all of the strategies here. These are all really interesting cards. I think that the way that they're trying to go here really with Arceus is that, and we talked about it a little bit in a video previously where we talked about the things that Pokemon Pocket could really use and the ways to sort of improve the format and improve the competitive nature of the game. One of the things that I talked about was that we don't have a lot of, dual energy type support, right? I think the thing that Arceus really allows us to do here is kind of mix and match Pokemon of a lot of different types that are all a little bit buffed when we're also playing them with Arceus, which is a colorless Pokemon in its own right. So kind of the way it kind of looks like here to me is that we're playing Arceus or Arceus EX, which is going to be a colorless Pokemon, and then we can kind of pick and choose, which energy package we kind of want to run with Arceus, whether that's, grass or fighting or water or whatever it is. And then we can kind of maybe choose to mix and match. And maybe we want, like let's just for an example, maybe we want, dark and we want fire, like we saw in that trailer video that we took a look at yesterday. And then we can kind of pair it with Arceus EX, which is a pretty strong attacker in its own right. So it's really interesting to me. I think hopefully there's some more additional support for these multi-energy decks. Again, I think it's all pretty gimmicky. We'll have to see. I think Arceus EX in its own right is just a strong card. It's probably going to see play with like, Magnezone or Dialga or Manaphy, and it's probably just going to be a really good card in its own right. I don't know if really any of these sort of Arceus branded cards are going to be maybe too gimmicky or just maybe not strong enough. We'll have to see. I think a lot of it's really interesting, but once we get the full set list, we should have a much, obviously, better idea of understanding maybe what's best or not from a competitive standpoint. But also keep in mind that in the next, upcoming month or so, things are going to develop really quickly from a competitive standpoint. So you want to stay tuned to the channel here where we cover, the competitive scene and the tournaments and the results and everything for Pokemon Pocket. So if you want to know what the best decks are and the best strategies are, stay tuned because we're going to be covering all of that in the upcoming weeks for sure. But right now, we're kind of just speculating. We also have Obama Snow, Stage 1 Water-type Pokemon, 120 HP. We have Vigor Link. So again, same as all the other ones, but now our attack cost is 1 less colorless energy. So technically, Obama Snow, 120 HP, stage 1 water Pokemon, can attack for Mega Punch, 80 damage, for 2 energies if Arceus is in play. Again, not terrible, but it, like, none of these cards to me are overly like broken. They're not like super strong that making me like really like jump back and consider like, man, like these cards are crazy. They're all like kind of good. They're all like kind of okay, which to me means that they're probably not going to be like super competitively viable and I guess really strong in the metagame, unless of course there's other context that we don't have yet, but nonetheless pretty interesting. And then one of my favorites here is actually Crobat Dark Stage 2 Pokemon, 110 HP, pretty low for a Stage 2 Pokemon. But it's got, right here, Cunning Link. So once during your turn, if you have an Arceus or Arceus EX in play, you may do 30 damage to one of your opponent's to your opponent's active Pokemon. So very similar to Greninja. Instead of 20 damage, it's 30 damage. Instead of being able to use Greninja's ability to damage any Pokemon on your opponent's board, now we're really locked to the active Pokemon. So I don't think this is a bad card. 1 energy, 50 damage is also pretty relevant in its own right. Free Retreat as well can be kind of nice, but this is a really interesting card. I don't think it's as good as Greninja in my opinion. Not only are we limited to the active Pokemon, which, you know, I think is a big upside for Greninja, is the fact that we're able to take KOs on the bench, but also target Pokemon to bring them up to the active spot with Cyrus. I think Greninja's really good. I think it's honestly better than Crobat, but also we have to play Arceus with this card to be able to use this effect. This is different than the other effects that we've seen here. The other effects on these other Link Pokemon, I'll call them, are basically like buffs to the Pokemon, whereas Crobat has like its own really strong ability that only works with Arceus. But again, we don't know what Arceus, the non-EX version of Arceus, will look like, so could be very interesting indeed. And again, Pokemon Pocket's a digital card game, so it doesn't have to follow the strict rules that the, you know, physical card game has to follow. You know, one of the things that I was maybe theory crafting or thinking that Arceus could be like is basically determined by the, or depending on the type of energy that is attached to Arceus, you know, you could actually change the type of the card, right? I mean, that's the effect from the game as well. I believe it changes the ability of its judgment attack, but since this is a digital card game, it wouldn't be very difficult for them to just like actually change the type of Arceus depending on the type of energies that it has onto it, right? Something you couldn't do on a physical card game, but something you definitely could do in a digital card game. So something like that we still have yet to see. Again, we don't know what the non-EX Arceus card will be. It's probably going to be pretty good, but I don't know. We'll have to see. We'll just, you know, we'll have to wait and see. But that's all of the Link Pokemon, and that's Arceus. So again, I don't know off the top of my head if any of these sort of Link strategies in Pokemon are going to make Arceus EX, or I guess when they're not going to combine to be their own super, you know, top tier strategies. However, I think Arceus in its own right, basic Pokemon 3 energies doing 130 is really strong just on its own. So we'll have to kind of wait and see how things wrap up. But either way, I do think that Arceus is going to be a very meta impactful card, and maybe we get some more of these Link Pokemon in the future. Well, again, we'll have to see. I think some of them are actually quite good. I think Rotom's good. I think Carnivine is good. I think Heatran and Tyranitar can be quite good, and then Crobat is also fairly good in its own right. So very interesting as well. But next up, let's move on to all of the other Pokemon that were showcased that, you know, we didn't really get a glimpse of yesterday. And these are, I would say, like actually leaked Pokemon, and that's going to be Leafeon and Glaceon. So these are really interesting cards. Leafeon especially is very interesting because we've seen a lot of grass type in the format recently and in the current metagame. We can kind of expect that grass is going to always be good for now with Celebi, with Erica's, with, you know, Executor, and just all of the other grass type cards that we have in the format. Now we have Leafeon EX, 140 HP, stage 1 Pokemon. It has the Forest Breath ability. This is a crazy one here. Once during your turn, if this Pokemon is in the active spot, you may take a grass energy from your energy zone and attach it to one of your grass type Pokemon. So it's not even an attack. It doesn't matter if we have enough energies on this thing to use its attack, it's just an ability. So basically, considering that you can evolve on your second turn, basically from your second turn onward, you should be able to get an extra grass energy attachment every turn while this thing is in the active spot. That's pretty significant as well. Retreat cost of 1, so we don't really even need to use this thing to attack. Its attack is fairly lackluster. Solar Beam, 70 damage for 3 energies. It's not terrible. It's not great, but basically it's a decent stage 1 size Pokemon, 140 HP, can do decent damage. It can also accelerate energies to itself, so you got to keep that in mind. 3 energies does seem like a lot for 70 damage, but it's really not when you consider that we can actually attach that extra grass energy to our own Leafeon EX when we're using this ability. I also think we can use Forest Breath more than once per turn if we're able to, go from one Leafeon in the active spot to another Leafeon by retreating and going into it. I think if we have two Leafeon EX, we should be able to use its ability twice per turn, which is pretty strong in its own right. But yeah, Solar Beam, 3 energies, technically speaking, we can attach and use this Forest Breath ability to accelerate an additional energy to itself on that same turn. So I think Solar Beam is a little bit better than maybe it is at first glance. 70 damage on your second turn, pretty reliably, I would say, especially if you're going second rather. You can attach, evolve, the next turn you can evolve, and then attach, and then, Forest Breath to yourself, and then turn 2 doing 70 damage is actually pretty significant. 140 HP, so it's not a bad card whatsoever. I think a lot of people are assuming that this is probably going to go well with Celebi. You could play it with Jungle Totem. I don't know exactly if that's going to be any better than Executor Celebi right now. I think the Jungle Totem is certainly pretty good. I just think that the format right now in the metagame is very much focused around early game damage and really good pacing basically with Cyrus. It doesn't matter if we're really setting up to 1-hit KO Pokemon because we can just play Cyrus, bring them back up, and just take KOs that way. So the format has leaned away pretty heavily from with the one-shot meta. So we'll have to see something another Celebi late game setup deck with Leafeon could be really strong, but I don't really know if it's going to be better than just sort of a really fast-paced, aggressive, fast-paced Executor deck, right, that we're kind of getting right now for grass-type decks that are pretty common. But not a bad card whatsoever. Probably going to be very, very impactful in the metagame. I think grass overall is really strong. We still have Ericus to heal this thing up. It's just honestly quite good. There's another grass card that we'll see here in a little bit. Shaman right here, also a cool card. But on top of Leafeon EX, we also have Glaceon EX, another really interesting Pokemon. So again, stage 1, 140 HP, retreat cost of 1, water type Pokemon. Snowy terrain. During Pokemon Checkup, if this Pokemon is in the active spot, do 10 damage to your opponent's active Pokemon. So if you don't know what Pokemon Checkup is, it's basically that time period after you end your turn, where kind of certain effects at the end of turns or whatnot go into effect, or they end or they begin. So basically, if you have a status condition, once you end your turn, you'll flip the coin to see if you're still asleep or still paralyzed, things like that. That time period in between turns is Pokemon Checkup. So if we have a Glaceon EX in the active spot, basically, we can attack, we can do whatever we want, and then once our turn ends, as long as Glaceon's in the active spot, we will be doing 10 damage to our opponent's active Pokemon. I think this is pretty cool, but I think that the only downside to this is that it has to be in the active spot. I think that if Glaceon didn't have to be in the active spot, it would be really good. It would be like Darkrai, but maybe just not as, not as strong, right? Because we're not having to attach the energies to it. I don't think it's a bad card. Freezing Wind, 90 damage for 3 energies. Is a little bit more than Leafeon for sure. We have Misties, we have, Manaphy to accelerate energies to this. We also have a new supporter card, which actually you'll see in a little bit, which heals water-type Pokemon. I think this card is pretty good. I don't know if it's better than things like Gyarados or Palkia or even Articuno to that extent, but the snowy terrain can be pretty cool. I think the ability itself is a little bit under-tuned, especially when we have things like Darkrai in the format right now. It doesn't seem bad, basically. It's basically sure, 90 damage every turn is pretty good. It's pretty consistent, no drawbacks, but it's really 100 damage every turn. Pretty good number, but it doesn't really matter. If we're doing 90 or 100 damage, it oftentimes isn't that big of a deal. Most of the time, we're 2-hit KOing Pokemon for 90 anyway, so that extra 10 damage, only to the active Pokemon as well, you got to keep in mind, is just a little bit awkward. But the one thing that we could do here with Glaceon that we have to keep in mind is that we don't have to really play this thing as an attacker, right? We can kind of just have it in the active spot. We can attach a giant cape to it. We have the new, supporter card, which we'll take a look at in a little bit, which can heal water Pokemon. And then maybe you could just play something like Darkrai, and you don't even have to play water energies in your deck. You can literally just play Glaceon to just sit it in the active spot and let it sit there, dealing damage, kind of a ticking time bomb, while we're also maybe attaching to Darkrai, doing additional damage. There's a lot of possibilities here. Maybe even in a Greninja-based deck where we're able to ping the bench while also chip the active Pokemon. There's a lot of potential with Glaceon here and a lot of strategies that I think maybe aren't super apparent at first glance, but we'll have to see exactly how good this card is. I think that it's not that bad, especially considering the new supporter card, which I guess we'll just take a look at really quickly. This is Irida, very similar to a card that's in the official card game, but a very different effect. So I think some players who bounce between the two might get mixed up here, but Irida, heal 40 damage from each of your Pokemon that have any water energy attached. This is crazy. There's no limit to this. So if every single one of your Pokemon is damaged and they all have water energy, then you can heal 40 damage from all of them. Technically speaking, we can do 160 damage healing in one turn, technically speaking, with Irida, which is just really strong. So it's not as good as Erica's in some scenarios, but it's better than Erica's in other scenarios. I really do like Irida. Again, it could be significant in the sense that, like I said, a lot of Pokemon like to do chip damage, and then, tag you to basically bring you up into the active spot with Cyrus. Irida could really help for that because it allows you to heal up basically multiple Pokemon at once. You could kind of cap off and heal up all of your water Pokemon so that they can't get, brought up with Cyrus, things like that. The potential here is pretty significant, and like I said, things like Palkia, like Gyarados that have a lot of HP could really, really benefit from a supporter card like Irida like this. Now, the one thing that we have to keep in mind with Irida is that water decks often also play Misty, so you can only play one supporter on your turn, so I think a lot of water decks are probably going to play both Irida and Misty, and then therefore you're kind of forced, plus you have Professor's Research or Cyrus, so you can only play one supporter per turn, so you got to choose between either, getting possibly those extra energy attachments or the healing. Again, you might just be kind of forced into, kind of forced down one road where you kind of want to go both roads. So there's scenarios like that for water type strategies. We'll have to see. It's not like Erica's where none of the Erica or grass type cards really, there's nothing else you would play. You're most likely just playing Erica's on your turn. So it's a little bit not as good in that sense, but it is definitely really, really good. I think that water type in the game has been and will be one of the best types basically going forward. It's just really, really cool to have another healing card, supporter card like this. Erica, very impactful in the format right now for sure. So I think Irida is going to also be very, very impactful. We can also, again, spread out those water energies to Pokemon that aren't even water type Pokemon with Manaphy. So you got to keep it like that. Manaphy as an engine, but when paired with Irida might even be that much better. And it might see play in other decks, maybe even Arceus decks as well. There's nothing saying we can't play Manaphy to accelerate energies to Arceus and then heal it up with Irida, right? Because it doesn't specify water type Pokemon, any Pokemon that has water energy attached to it. So pretty crazy. There's a lot of scenarios here, a lot of interactions that we're going to see in this new format that are very, very exciting. And then yes, we have Garchomp EX. I know a lot of people thought that the trailer was fake because there was a Gible and a Garchomp and a Gabite on the bench and all that stuff, and people were saying that it wasn't real, but the cards themselves seemed extremely real, and I kind of knew that they were going to be real just by the way that the designs are. Like, technically you could have faked all that, but it would have been very hard to fake it. But either way, we have already talked about Garchomp a little bit here. Linear attack now confirmed. It is doing 50 damage to one of your opponent's Pokemon. This is pretty significant. Dragon Claw, 100 damage. A lot of people were also saying that Cynthia won't work with Garchomp EX because it's not, because Cynthia doesn't specify Garchomp EX, so that could possibly be the case. If it is the case, Dragon Claw is a very weak attack on a stage 2 Pokemon, 3 energies, 130. Not very good. Very, very not good, in fact, but linear attack is a strong attack here. I think it's basically its own win condition. There's a lot of scenarios where 50 damage in the late game to a bench Pokemon is just going to KO it. So I actually really like Garchomp. We are weak to grass, so it's a little bit awkward. There is a new fighting type Gible, which we'll see in a little bit right here, and there's a fighting type Gabite, but the thing is they're all weak to grass, and that's a problem in a format right now that is heavily dominated by Executors. So you got to keep that in mind as well. That's somewhat of a downside, especially since we have to evolve this thing. We can attack on curve, which is kind of cool. But like I said, with heavy Executor and grass types in the format right now, with Leafeon, grass is still going to be very, very common. That grass weakness could be a big deal for Garchomp. Either way, linear attack is a strong attack. I just don't know. At first glance, I thought Garchomp was going to be very weak. I thought it was a very undertuned card, but I think 50 damage to any one of your opponent's Pokemon for 1 energy is actually really significant. It's kind of a win condition in its own right. If you think about a lot of decks are playing, copies of Cyrus. When you're playing Garchomp EX, you don't really have to play Cyrus because you can kind of just finish off those KOs pretty consistently with linear attack. So I don't know. We'll have to see. Garchomp could be good, but stage 2 Pokemon are tough in general because you probably are running 6 Pokemon in your deck to accommodate the entire evolution line for these stage 2 Pokemon. So kind of tough. I don't know. Cool to be a fighting type Pokemon. I know some people were kind of confused why we have same cards but like different typing. Like we have like a dragon type Garchomp and a metal and a fighting type Garchomp. It's pretty common in the TCG. I don't think that's really something to stress about or be really too confused about. But yeah, interesting. So we have a dragon type Garchomp and a fighting type Garchomp. The fighting type, of course, accommodates the ground typing that Garchomp also has. But yeah, that's Garchomp EX. We talked about it already a little bit, so I'm not going to go into too much detail. And we also have Probopass EX. So this one's kind of cool here. We finally have an additional, steel type or metal type EX Pokemon to go with Dialga. Probopass is actually pretty interesting. So it's a stage 1 Pokemon with 160 HP. That's a lot. So that's on par with Executor EX. And we've got 1 attack here, defensive unit, 90 damage, which is actually not a bad amount of damage at all. 2 KOing most Pokemon in the format. For 3 energies, 2 metal, and 1 colorless. During your opponent's next turn, this Pokemon takes 20 less damage from attacks. Not that bad at all. So again, the staying power here, you could play Giant Cape, go to 180. You can power this thing up with Dialga. You can attack for 90 damage. It's not that bad of a card, basically, and I like that it's a stage 1 Pokemon with a lot of HP and a decent amount of staying power. I think this is going to be a really, really great anti-Executor card, which I think is really, really important in the format right now. A pretty decent, metal tempo-based deck with Dialga, Probopass. Maybe you play Arceus. There's a lot of different combinations and opportunities, basically, for new strategies in this next upcoming metagame, which I'm really excited about. But I do like Probopass. Retreat cost of 3 is a little bit rough, I'm not going to lie. Once it's in the active spot, it's kind of just staying there. But again, with Cyrus, we're kind of doing that anyway in the format. I actually really like Probopass. I think it's quite a good card, and this would be a good time to mention the new Adaman supporter card, which reads that during your opponent's next turn, all of your metal Pokemon take 20 less damage from attacks of your opponent's Pokemon. So this includes your bench Pokemon as well, similar to, I believe, what it was at Blue. Blue did a similar effect like this, but now it's just double. It's, 20 less damage from all your Pokemon as long as they're metal type. So I really do like this card. I think that it's actually going to be fairly useful in a lot of scenarios. Again, when combined with Probopass, that's 40 less damage in a single turn, which is pretty significant when we have 160 or even 180 HP with Giant Cape. So I really, really like Probopass. I think it could be pretty decent. We'll have to see if Dialga is fast enough to really be good in the format overall. We'll have to see, but we knew that Dialga isn't that bad of a card, and I do love that we have Probopass now to pair with it. And next up, we have Shaman. This is actually a really interesting card. It's I don't know if people really I don't know if a lot of people were surprised by this card or maybe, looked twice at a card like this, but it's actually really, really strong. As long as this Pokemon is on your bench, this is the Sky Support ability. Your active basic Pokemon's retreat cost is 1 less. So very significant, basically. So as long as we're playing a deck with primarily basic Pokemon, they have 1 less retreat cost. It's like an infinite X speed. This may seem like it's a little bit, specific, I suppose, and it certainly could be looked at that way. But the way I look at Shaman like this is in decks where, if we're playing Pokemon, multiple Pokemon, but we have one Pokemon in particular that we would love to start with, now we have the ability to basically retreat out for free on that first turn with Shaman and go into the other basic Pokemon we would rather have in the active spot. So I think it's going to be really, really consistent in the early game. The other thing that you got to mention here is that Shaman does, have an attack for 30 colorless, for 30 damage for 2 colorless energy, so you could attack with it. But it's also a basic Pokemon with 1 energy in its retreat cost anyway. So technically speaking, in a deck like this, if you're playing Shaman, even if you start with it, you should just be able to retreat out for free all of the time, no matter what, right? So it's pretty cool, basically. It's a Pokemon that, is providing some value to your deck and to the rest of your Pokemon by buffing them with Sky Support, but it also is never a Pokemon that is going to get stuck in the active spot, because no matter what deck we're playing Shaman in, it can always retreat out of the active spot for free itself, which I think is actually really, really good. It's a really good consistency card. I don't think it's going to be super viable or valuable in every deck, but in some decks, it's actually going to be, I think, a really, really big deal. So I really do like Shaman. I think that it's probably going to see quite a bit of play because, again, there's not really a lot of downside to playing it other than, of course, not having a lot of HP and being able to get, like, sniped by things like that do bench damage. So that can be a little bit dangerous for sure, but pretty cool. I love that Shaman card. And then we have Giratina, 120 HP Dragon-type basic Pokemon. Crisis Dive does 120 for a Grass, a Psychic, and a Colorless. And then you discard 2 random energies from this Pokemon. I really don't have a lot to say about this card. I think it's absolutely terrible. I think this is one of the worst cards I've ever seen in my life. I just don't... There's no reason to ever play this in a Grass/Psychic dual energy deck. And then you also need a 3rd energy on this thing to do 120 damage and then not be able to attack for 2 more turns. It's just not very good. No, we're not weak to anything, but our retreat cost is 3, so we're stuck in the active spot. It's just not good. I really don't like Giratina. Maybe it is good. Maybe there's a card that specifically accelerates Grass and Psychic energies in a way that makes this card really good, but at first glance, this Giratina card just seems like it's not something that anyone would ever choose to play. We'll have to see. We don't have the full set list yet. Here's the Nose Pass, 80 HP. we can tackle for 10 damage. It's fighting type, so this is something to note that, yes, in order to play Probopass, which is kind of an anti-Executor card, we have to first evolve from Nosepass, which is weak to grass and has 80 HP and a retreat cost of 3. So nobody's safe from Executor. Keep that in mind for sure. They also showed a new Burmy. I don't know. I don't know, really. There's Burmy. There it is. Look at him. Look at this guy. Okay. There's also, yeah, so did we see Magnemite yet? But there's going to be a Steel type Magnemite and Magnum Ton cards. So keep that in mind. I don't know if people would really ever choose to play these, aside from the electric ones, unless of course you wanted to attack like on curve with Magnemite and Magneton and then into Magnezone. Maybe you do that. Honestly, I'm not exactly sure what the strategy is there. But then if we go down here, I think the rest of these are promo cards. Actually, there's a couple other stuff to take a look at. This is the normal Magnemite. This is the art that is the normal one. There's also a promo Manaphy coming. Again, these are all cards that are leaked. We'll have to see the full set list in a bit. But this is the same Oceanic Gift Manaphy, just a new art. There's a promo Snorlax card here. There's another new Eevee. I think we already have this card. I'm not even sure. There's another Golbat. Again, I thought we also had this exact card, but I could be wrong. But that's Golbat as well. There's a promo Darkrai coming. Same Darkrai EX as before, but pretty cool art there. Might as well show that. Here is the full art version of Gible. Again, I really like the art here, but something to note. Again, 1 energy, fighting type, and its attack cost, so we should be able to attack with Gible, Gabite, and Garchomp turn after turn, because I think they all have 1 energy in their attack cost. So somewhat significant, but they are weak to grass, so keep that in mind. There's also a Cherrim here. I don't know. Do we already have this card? I can't remember. Like, this is a promo, but I don't know if we already have this Cherrim card. Either way, Leech Seed, 60 damage for 2 grass energies on a stage 1 Pokemon, 80 HP, and heal 20 damage from this Pokemon. Not very significant, not very good. There's also a promo Nosepass with 20 less HP, which means we would never play this card, especially with Executor, meaning that even when they flip tails, they're still KOing us for that 40 damage attack. Probably don't want to play that Nosepass, that's my opinion. There's also a new Staraptor, which has Defensive Whirlwind. This ability reads, it takes 30 less damage from attacks from blank Pokemon. We don't exactly know what kind of Pokemon that is. Could be colorless, could be fighting, we'll have to see. But interesting nonetheless here. That Staraptor card. There's also the same Raichu that we saw previously, but it's a different artwork. Again, another promo here. Here's the original Gible art. Again, we don't know. I guess we already do know the card there, but that's that. And then here's the Gabite, which again has a 1 energy, attack cost here. Probably does 30 or 40 damage. So also fighting type, also weak to grass. And then we see here that there's an unknown that they showed in the trailer. It's got the ability check. Once during your turn, you may choose either player. Look at the top card of that player's deck. So this is pretty cool. You can look at the top card of your deck and the top card of your opponent's deck once per turn. And I don't mind that. Also 20 damage. It's colorless. You can put this in any deck. I don't love cards like this because they're basically very susceptible to just getting like Sabrina KO'd, or, they can get bench sniped like twice by Hitmonlee and it gets KO'd. So it's a little bit dangerous to play Pokemon like this. Also, like, looking at the top card of your deck and your opponent's deck is valuable information, but most of the time Pokemon Pocket games don't really matter, and you're not really going to be changing the decisions that you make based off what the top card of their deck is. So you got to kind of keep that in mind as well. But yeah, here's a Krogunk with Beat, does 20 damage. Again, that's all we really know. And then there's a supporter card called Berry that we don't know what it does yet, but it is confirmed. So this isn't all of the supporter cards or Pokemon cards, or maybe even all of the Pokemon EX cards. We could be getting more as well. We'll have to wait and see. Here is the Rainbow Rare version of Glaceon. It looks very, very cool. I really like this art as well. I'm excited to see what the other arts are as well. And here's the normal art for Irida. And yeah, that's basically everything. That's everything that was leaked, at least, or shown previously to the release, which will be coming on the 28th, Friday, tomorrow. So yeah, there it is, guys. Again, I think that there's massive shifts coming to the metagame, just like when every expansion comes out. Now, nothing here that we've seen today really jumps out of the page to me as overwhelmingly strong. I think in a format where we have Executor and Celebi, we have Darkrai Magnezone, we have Manaphy and Palkia, there's a lot of decks that are just really, really good. We have Gyarados, we have Charizard, so it's hard to say that any of these particular cards will see more play than the cards that are already seeing more play. But once we get the full set list and then we see how all of the new cards are also interacting with all of the cards that we have right now in the metagame, we'll see. And that's really all that we can talk about. I think that Arceus is going to be pretty impactful. I think a lot of these cards are actually going to be somewhat impactful in the format. I just can't sit here and tell you what's going to be better than not, or better than all the other cards, what's going to be the best, what's not going to be the best. I just don't know yet. Tomorrow when the set comes out, stay tuned because we're going to be making a whole bunch of videos about the new cards, about the new decks, about the new strategies, and I'm super, super excited for that. So don't forget to like the channel, or I said like the channel again. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe. That's like the 5th time I made that mistake, but yeah. Stay tuned, basically. Stay tuned because we're going to be doing a whole bunch of other videos about all of these new cards and the new Triumphant Light set. I'm actually really, really excited. So, yeah, we should have a lot of extra cards. Again, I think this set's probably going to have about 60 unique cards. We've only seen like 20 or 30, so a lot of cards that we haven't seen yet should be coming. So this is not close to the full set, just kind of a sneak peek. But, yeah, I wanted to make this video because we had more information post the announcement. Tomorrow, I think we're at midnight, technically, tonight, the set releases, so it should be very, very exciting. But yeah, let's wrap it up there, guys. Comment below what you think about all of this. What cards are your favorite? What strategies are you looking forward to playing? What cards do you think are going to be good, not good? Let me know. I love all of the discussion. Keep it civil down in the comment sections below for sure. But yeah, peace out, guys. Have a good one. We'll see you guys later. Stay tuned. More videos coming. And yeah, bye.